A while back, I watched an interview between Alex O'Connor and Bart Ehrman. And in the course of that interview, Bart Ehrman made a statement that was so obviously false that I just about fell off my chair when he said it. And I had to replay that section to make sure my ears actually heard what I thought he said. And in fact, he did. He made a wildly false claim in that interview. And unfortunately, in a video that Alex O'Connor just released a few days ago, Alex O'Connor actually believed Bart Ehrman when he said this, and in probably good faith repeats that false claim.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, Q, M, and L, okay? All of that together, Jesus never calls himself God.
Okay, there you have it. The original false statement that Ehrman makes, said with complete confidence in the style of, say, Billy Carson. Now let's continue on to see Alex O'Connor's response.
Nowhere in Mark, Matthew, or Luke does Jesus actually claim to be God in his own words. At best, it's just in John's Gospel that divine claims begin to appear. Don't you think it's a bit suspicious that these claims only show up in our latest Gospel? If Jesus was known to be walking around claiming explicitly to be God himself, did the other 3 Gospel authors just not think this was relevant?
Okay, so I think Alex O'Connor is sincere here. He actually believed what Bart Ehrman said. And that is unfortunate because I have seen a number of cases where it would really help Alex O'Connor if he actually fact-checked Bart Ehrman. But he seems to accept him, and as a result, Alex O'Connor gets played by Bart Ehrman. And there's a beautiful case I want to look at in a future video. But for now, this statement, why is it so obviously and blatantly false? Well, Jesus' most explicit and most audacious and most significant claim to be God was actually made in the Gospel of Mark. And it's significant and audacious and blatant simply because he made it before the entire council of religious leaders in Israel. He didn't make it just to somebody on the street. It was made before the entire council. Now, if you're God and you want to make a statement that you are God in first century Israel, there is no better place to do it. There is no more audacious place to do it than to stand up before the entire council and state that you are none other than the Most High God. In 2 different ways he does it here. So let's read that incident and pay close attention to what Jesus says. So first of all, the Gospel of Mark states that this occurred before the, and I quote, whole council. Everybody was there of the religious leaders. It was the entire council, not just said in front of a few people. So far in the investigation, Jesus had refused to say anything. So finally the chief priest says this, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" Now pay close attention to what Jesus says next, and especially pay close attention to the reaction of the high priest. So Jesus said, and I quote, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his robes and said, "What further witnesses do we need? You have heard the blasphemy." Ehrman, if you were to ask him about this passage, might come up with some sort of a creative story that he will describe as being complicated, probably, because I've seen him use that word whenever he's about to introduce what in philosophy we call sophistry. And I would highly recommend, before you read any of Ehrman's creative stories, that you get well versed on what sophistry means. But back to this. Jesus made 2 explicit claims to be God. The first one is that he responds to the question with the statement, "I am." And in Greek, it's ego eimi. Now in Greek, this phrase ego eimi, or I am, doesn't necessarily mean anything special. But in Hebrew or Aramaic, it is the name of God, the creator of the universe. To tell the difference, when you're looking at the Greek, you have to look at the context to see if ego eimi means something is translating the name of God, or is it just as in normal usage. And in this case, you can see from the reaction of the high priest that he's translating the name of God. When Jesus simply says, "Ego eimi," and doesn't follow it up immediately with like, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," or "I am the door," or "I am the good shepherd." None of that. It's just simply ego and me. I am. And then he makes his second explicit claim to be God by referring to a vision that the prophet Daniel had centuries earlier. In that vision, recorded in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel saw a being like a son of man, he describes this being, who would rule for all eternity. And towards the end of that chapter, the angel gives him further understanding of this vision and what he was seeing. And with regard to this being who would rule for all eternity, he also refers to him as the Most High, which is another name for God. So according to this vision, the Most High God would appear at some point in the future in appearance as a son of man. So the chief priests wanted to clear this up, because Jesus had literally been walking around during his entire ministry referring to himself as the Son of Man without further clarification. And in every case except for maybe one, Jesus always put a definite article in front of Son of Man. He always referred to himself as the Son of Man, only once, I think, as a Son of Man. So the high priest wanted to clarify this. Is Jesus claiming to be this being who is the Most High, who will rule for all eternity? Is that what he means when he's calling himself the Son of Man? And Jesus' response is to literally quote from that prophecy, indicating that you're looking at him. You're looking at the Son of Man who will one day rule for all eternity and who is also the Most High. And if there's any doubt as to what Jesus was clearly stating in this case, those two claims to be God, you look at the reaction of the high priest and the ruling council. Now I'm sure that, Bart Ehrman would have a creative story to try and explain away this data, but you got to look at what the people of the day understood him to be saying. Not someone in the 21st century coming up with a creative story here, but a group of people who spoke the same language as Jesus, who were aware of the same prophecies of Jesus and very well aware of those, and growing up in that culture and heard him with his own ears and were there when he said it. And their reaction tells you the whole story. The most audacious and blatant and significant and perhaps the most important claim to be God made by Jesus in the first century was recorded in the Gospel of Mark, which he made before the entire ruling council of religious leaders in Israel.